I've owned Eddie the edible printer for about 4 months now and printed over 1,000 cookies, and I wanted to give an updated review and maybe share some insights about my printing experience that might help you. It's been really interesting owning the Eddie and sharing that on social media because I feel like there are a lot of strong opinions about it. There's a lot of discussion about the presence of Eddie in our industry and how that may or may not impact the industry as a whole, because automating processes that we usually do by hand, like airbrushing or via wet on wet, does that devalue the artistry that goes into decorating cookies? I think we have to look at it from a macro lens. There's a lot of things that happen in the world that impact old technologies, they get replaced. I think we have to look at Eddie as a tool and something new and to accept it for what it is. So yes, some people might look at this and be like, hey, we're just printing a logo cookie. It's so fast, it's so easy. But also at the same time, there are going to still be people who want everything done by scratch and, you know, icing done from scratch, logos done by hand. There's always going to be that group of people, but there always also will be a group of people who move on and are totally okay with the whole fully printed cookie idea. I'm not here to convince you either way, yes or no. I'm here to give you information so that you can make an informed decision on your own based on what your unique situation is. Before printers, we used to write everything by hand too, and there was an artistry to putting together books and the binding and the paper, the ink, the writing style, everything. And some of that has been lost over time. That's just modernization and what happens. And will that happen with Eddie? Maybe, but that's kind of like the bigger picture here, and you have to decide, you know, where you are in that spectrum of being okay with that. But the reality is, now that the technology has come out, people are going to start using it. So how do I use it, and what are some things that you should look out for? If you missed my unboxing video and you want to go back and check it out, it's linked for you in the description box. One of the biggest barriers of entry that I experienced when I first got the Eddie, and the reason why I let it sit in its box for a month, was because I was so turned off by all these like negative things people were posting on the Facebook group. People were having trouble with like overspray, it not centering. I just felt like there were a lot of people that were struggling, and it really impacted my perception of Eddie when I got it. Again, when you take a step back and look at the macro picture, for user groups like that, the bulk of the activity comes from the people who are struggling, and that's not an accurate representation of the product as a whole. I would say that for the most part, if you're happy with the service or you have no issues, you usually say nothing and usually don't go out of the way to give it extra praise. And that's the part you don't see in a Facebook group. After you get over that initial mental hump of just seeing like the horror stories up front in a sense, and you're able to like get yourself to set it up, it's not bad at all. One of the things I struggled with most for the Eddie straight out of the box was the platform and how it would like send my cookie flying because it was such a small platform. And not only was it small, it's got little grooves on it, but like you're putting a cookie on it, it's not going to grip very well. There are a lot of third-party companies that create accessories for the Eddie, and they're mostly around like trays that sort of slide onto the tongue, and it allows you to get better alignment of your prints, more consistently aligned prints, and it's grippier for your cookies so they don't get yeeted off the platform. To help me get perfectly aligned prints every time and to prevent my cookies from shifting, I purchased the Sprinkle Factory's Eddie tray. You can check it out. We linked it for you in the description box. Tony does a great job of designing these like kind of minimalist feeling trays that are really smooth, they're magnetized, they work really well. It comes with an anti-slip mat as well as a grid mat so you can center everything. There's a lot of options. I hear that they all work great. This is the one that I ended up going with. The next thing I want to talk about is Eddie performance, both speed of prints and the quality of prints. I see a lot of people struggling with image quality, images looking blotchy, or they have some icing colors fading over time. So I want to address some of those things based on my observations. I know there's a huge range of recipes for cookies and royal icing out there, as well as how your technique impacts the final result. So I can only really talk about my techniques and my recipes here. With my royal icing and all of my cookie recipes, Eddie seems to do really well. I've not experienced any issues with over or under spraying or color bleeding. I attribute these things to having a properly beat base royal icing, something that's not underbeat or overbeat, and something that you haven't overworked as like you're getting your icing to the right consistency. There are also environmental factors at play here because I live in a very dry climate, and for the most part in my house we're sitting at between 35 and 40% humidity, which is pretty low. The more humidity you have in your environment, one, it takes a lot longer for your icing to fully dry, and two, all that moisture really messes with the ink that's being added on top of your icing via Eddie. For me, I add white gel base to my base icing, and I notice that when I do add my white gel base, the prints tend to print at a certain saturation and they kind of get toned down a little bit as it dries. I don't know if that's true across the board, whether you're using glaze or printing on marshmallows or whatever it is, but that's what I've noticed for me. I bake and flood my cookies all on the same day, and I let my cookies crust in the dehydrator after I have flooded them for about half an hour up to an hour before I take them out, let them fully cool, and then I print on them via Eddie, and then I give it another 24 hours before bagging and heat sealing. I've never had to use cornstarch or anything, but I attribute this to giving enough time for the icing to totally dry all the way through. I've noticed that if you're experiencing bleeding or blotchiness, that's usually a result of excess moisture trapped in your icing or your cookie. So there are two things you can really watch out for. First is to bake your cookies adequately so that they're not like still raw in the center. You can tell because it'll divot or it'll look very oily. It's not fully baked. A lot of that excess moisture can leach back into the icing, causing icing bleed and butter bleed. And any of that moisture can get trapped, and if you're heat sealing, it's going to cause problems because the texture is going to homogenize throughout if you're heat sealing and making it airtight. So my suggestion is always give your icing plenty of time to dry and you should have no problems, and do not underbake your cookies. As far as technical settings, I started off using Eddie on a Windows PC, and I actually got a MacBook, so now I'm printing it via MacBook, and the only thing I installed for using it with my Mac was Print Hub to look at the various settings for Eddie. When I print directly using the print built-in print function in my MacBook. Just command print, set the size, have it centered on the tray, and that's all I do. I print at 65% saturation on 25% speed, and I realize that's pretty slow speed. It could go a lot faster, but I find that speed works for me as far as keeping the same level of quality for all my prints. Now, if I wanted to go up in saturation and increase the speed a little bit, I could do that too. I printed on quality setting number 2. I think there are 4 settings. 4 being the absolute best quality. I find that 2 is adequate for most of my needs. One of the things I notice people struggling with is kind of the print changing as after you finish printing and you notice smudging. Now, it's sometimes tempting to touch your royal icing with your bare hands after you've flooded them. Do not do that because there are oils on your fingers that might inadvertently get stuck on the surface of your icing, causing issues when Eddie prints on them. And oil, you know, that's a lubricant. If you get it on your royal icing, that's gonna smudge. As far as maintenance goes, it's not as bad as I think I made it out to be in my own head. There's a cookie sensor on the side that you just have to wipe off every week, not a big deal. The manufacturers do recommend that you keep your Eddie plugged in so that it can run like automatic processes to kind of clear out the print head so that you get like a continuously maintained high level of print quality. You do have to learn to like clean out the filters, which is just basically a sponge that you can pull out and kind of like clean in the sink. And you also have to be willing to reach out to customer service if you have any problems. They actually have an incredible customer service care line that's open many days out of the week except for Sunday, I believe. almost every day except for Sunday. For somebody like me who hates airbrushing, this is like a godsend. I can do all kinds of designs now without doing like 5-layer airbrushes or switching out the colors or maintaining an airbrushing gun, cleaning it. So for me, this product makes sense and it's a great tool that I'm happy to have in my business. People are always wondering how far your print cartridge goes, and that really depends on what you're printing, right? Because if you're filling up the whole cookie, then of course you're gonna get less prints out of it. I would say my designs are probably about like a 30 to 50% coverage on cookies, and my count is currently sitting at about 1,200 cookies, and I am down to about 75% of my cartridge. So if we do the math, 1,200 cookies and we can times 4, that is close to 5,000 cookies that you can print on one cartridge. Cartridge is like 150 bucks, so you can do the math on that and make sure you add that to your cookie pricing. Hopefully that helps. If you have any other questions or curiosities, drop them in the comment section. We'll try to get them answered. And if you already own an Eddy or you don't and you are curious about it, I hope you will check out the Facebook group, but also make sure to take that with a grain of salt, because most of those people are people that have been struggling with their Eddy. Don't forget to like, subscribe, all those things. Thanks. See you in the next video.